Dr. Stark approached me last summer when we first moved here, and I'll give you a little background on that, and said, hey, we'd love to do Parent University again. Would you help us? And I said, sure, I'd love to. So we talked about some content topics that we wanted to touch and cover during the year, and there were two that sort of emerged, and I'll tell you more about the second one at the end of our time together tonight. This one, of course, is on technology, social media, so we'll focus on that a little bit tonight. But if you have a question, comment, even a rude remark, I'll take it. And I'll be very happy to receive that. So even from our Georgia Tech friends, so that would be awesome. So, well, let me pray for us. And I do have some announcements, which I hope you'll find exciting, and we'll dive in. Father, thank you for these parents, grandparents that are here tonight. We're so grateful for their commitment to raising their kids in a godly home, raising their grandkids in a godly home. And Father, it's our heart to invest in the next generation and to declare your mighty works. And so, Father, that's our hope and prayer tonight. I pray that you would give us wisdom as parents and as grandparents as we navigate the technology maze and the impact that it's having upon the next generations. And Father, help us to have clarity and wisdom as we do so. Lord, I'm grateful for the ministry and presence of Eastside Christian School, for Dr. Stark, the administration, the faculty, everybody that pours themselves in, and especially the students. So Lord, thank you that you're raising up men and women, boys and girls who can be a voice and a light of the gospel. So Lord, thank you for this opportunity tonight to just talk as peers about some of the impact of technology and social media on our kids. And we ask this in Jesus' name, amen. A little bit about me, and we'll move on quickly. My name's Scott Kelly, and I serve as the chaplain here at Eastside Christian School, also on the church staff as pastor of discipleship and family ministries. And my wife and son and I moved here late July, and I started August the 1st. So my first day was the first day of school on August the 1st. And so we've been here a minute, just barely. But we also have friends here that we've known for years, Pastor John and Daryl Whipple, Dr. Stark, and a lot of the staff, even Marlon. And I really do have the best job in the world because I get to work with Marlon every day, and it doesn't get any better than that. So Marlon's here tonight, so thank you, my friend. Glad you're here. There's my email. I'll give it to you in case you want it at the end of this presentation, but I also want you to know that there are some sign-in sheets at the end of the pews where you're sitting, and there are pens. The reason I'd love to get you to put your name and your email address is so that we can email you this presentation when we're done, so you can have it as a resource. And then it also gives you a chance to follow up with me if you have any questions or suggestions or things that you might want to recommend as a parent. So if you would just take a minute and do that, and then we'll email this presentation to you as a PDF, so it won't be a massive PowerPoint or ProPresenter file, but it'll be a PDF, and that way you can reference that, okay? So that really helps, and I appreciate it. And you can just leave those in the pews, and I'll pick them up later, okay? All right, this is my family. That's my wife, Meredith, in the middle, of course, with the hat. And that tall drink of water on the right side is my son, Jackson. He is 15. And the reason I wanted to show you this picture is a couple of reasons. I am swimming in these technology and social media waters with you. I have a teenager in my home who is a sophomore at Wheeler High School. And he is active on social media. In fact, he has one social media account, and he's an Instagrammer, so he likes to draw, so that's his platform. So the reason I want to share this with you is to tell you we're having the same, or at least similar conversations in our home, trying to set the same guardrails and boundaries for him as you probably are with your kids. And so I'm in the fight with you, and it is not so much in our household a fight, but it is a constant source of monitoring. And we have to ask the question every single day, and then we have to come home after school and go, Jackson, why were you on your Instagram account in the middle of your psychology class today? Which happens. So we know that it creeps, and we understand. Now, I'm curious to know, how many of you have kids with smartphones? Can I know? Nobody has a smartphone. Okay, wow, well done. All right, so if the kids, grandkids don't have smartphones, have you set a timeline or date or age when you think you will allow them to have one? Because I'm sure some of them are probably asking. So I saw a yes. So
We haven't set a date for a smartphone, but a phone will have
okay,
him when he gets Eagle Scout, which looks to be about 16.
I love the incentive. That's beautiful.
He's so excited he can do it,
That's great.
but not necessarily a smartphone.
Well, I'm just impressed that he's going for Eagle Scout. So where is he now in the? Okay, so he's making progress. That's pretty impressive. Well, any other thresholds, dates, years, ages, incentives? Okay, 13. All right, good. Any other thoughts that have come out of your mouth, maybe by accident? 35, same day. Okay, great. That's wonderful. Well, we told our son Jackson that when we moved here from South Carolina, we told him it was illegal in the state of Georgia to marry until you were 30. So I don't know that he's bought it, but that's what we've told him. So, well, I will confess as a parent that when he turned 14, he got a cell phone. Now, the beautiful thing is he really wasn't asking for one, but every time he would go somewhere with his buddies, whether it was to dinner or to a movie or whatever he was doing with his buddies, he would text either me or my wife Meredith through one of his friends' phones. And so that got a little weird because then all of a sudden I was replying to text to a 12 and 13-year-old, and that was a little awkward. And so I had to also reach out to the parents and go, hey, I just want you to know Jackson doesn't have a cell phone, our son. And so we've been texting just so we can coordinate drop-offs and pickups and those kinds of things. And so my wife and I said, you know what? We probably need to get him a phone. And so when he turned 14, he got a phone. And I'll talk a little more about the social media perspective on all of that as well when we get to that point. So we're in the waters with you, so we feel the pain. So here's what we're going to talk about tonight, and we'll touch these categorically. Talk about social media and how it's really an unfair fight for you as parents and really for kids too, and we'll talk specifically about that, the impact that it's making on our kids, how to parent in a media-saturated world, and also how to begin to initiate what I like to call a digital declutter in your world. And I'm sure some of you have already are either doing this or you've talked about it or you've experimented, and we'll get some ideas from you as well. And then some strategies to redeem that digital intrusion. And then we'll talk about some resources and best practices. And certainly at that point, we want to hear from you. What are you doing that's working, or what have you tried that's failed? And we would love to know that because that helps all of it. Brandy Martine, glad to have you tonight. Glad you're bundled up. Y'all looking dapper tonight. So, very good. All right, so a little background. Most of you know this. When we talk about generations, I know I'm talking to a somewhat broad audience as far as generations. My suspicion is most of your kids are going to fall into one of two of the generational categories. And what is interesting is most of you know about the silent generation, boomers, Generation X, and millennials, which we hear a lot about, but the generation we're probably addressing tonight with you as parents and grandparents are those that we call Generation Z, which were born up until 2012. And now the latest nomenclature for the generational band is Generation Alpha. Have any of you heard that? Well, that's the new generational nomenclature. And so we're really looking at those who are about 10 years old and younger, who are Generation Alpha. So I'm curious to know, how many of you are the parents or grandparents of a 10-year-old or younger? Let me see. That's almost everybody in the room. And yours is a 11, so. Okay, so you're kind of drifting into that Generation Z category, all right? Well, we'll talk up to both sides of that equation just to give you some thoughts and ideas. The next few slides and the next bit of data we'll talk about is really gonna sound negative, and it's all the data and statistics, but I want you to know what you're up against, as if you don't already know. But the bigger narrative, the bigger picture for all of us is, well, it's a little distressing. And it is what we like to call a lopsided arms race. And so what I want to do is just talk in broad sweeping ways, or some of the manners in which social media is hurting our kids. And these are kind of the 5 categorical ways. Number 1 is creates emotional insecurity. And by that, what we're seeing is an identity crisis among the younger generations who are active on social media, and that is manifesting itself in a lot of ways, including, I would say, a surge in the LGBTQ community. And we're seeing that through social media. I know some of you have witnessed that or read about that. Of course, we know about cyberbullying. And that happens on social media. There are a lot of kids who are fearful, afraid, and anxious because they've been bullied in some way on social media. We all know there are sexual predators out there. Even Facebook admitted it. They did studies and realized that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of predators on social media looking for kids, looking for minors. It also creates unrealistic expectations, and there are unhealthy influences. Some of those are anger, and part of that is because it's just unfiltered. There is no accountability on social media. We all know that. And so it's created a whole world unto itself, and it has sucked our kids into it. And so these are just some broad categories. So let's talk about one of the primary things that we're seeing among teenagers because of technology and social media. 44% of teenagers today, this is 13 to 17, so that's the range, a little older than some of yours, experience persistent feelings of sadness. Most of them call that depression or anxiety. And we'll talk a little bit about the categories of depression and anxiety in just a couple of minutes, but almost half of all teenagers are experiencing this. I know some of that is groupthink. If you get with people who say they're anxious or depressed, you begin to feel anxious or depressed. So it is infectious and toxic in its own way, but we're seeing a significant number. Now, during the pandemic, this is interesting. 31% of teenage boys contemplated suicide. 56% of girls contemplated suicide. And 75% of teenagers who identify as LGBTQ contemplated suicide. So the epidemic of suicide, at least in terms of its thought processes, has dramatically escalated, and the pandemic only exaggerated that whole problem. And so we're seeing this on a huge scale. Now, there's some corresponding factors to all of this, and here's one report that I wanted to show to you. According to the Journal of American Medical Association, kids' average daily screen time increased 1.5 times during the pandemic. From a baseline of 162 minutes a day before the pandemic to 246 minutes during the pandemic. And here's the problem, it's not come down. So we set the bar a little higher as far as screen time, as far as average daily smartphone, computer screen, social media, and it has maintained that average between 240 and 250 minutes a day. Now that, again, that's among teenagers for the most part, 13 to 17, but the numbers are not that much different for some of our younger kids. And this study was done it was 46 different studies done among 30,000 teenagers. So in other words, the test results were valid. And that's what they're finding. So that is certainly an issue. Now, as parents and grandparents, you know that it is very hard to parent in a technological age, in a digital age. And a Pew report, and again, I know that might be a little hard to read. In fact, you can see it better on that screen than you can on that screen. So I'm gonna turn around and we'll take a look at this together. 66% or 2 out of 3 parents say that parenting kids today is harder than it was 20 years ago. 2/3 say it was harder. And what is interesting is the factors that make it harder, almost all of those in green are related to technology, screen time, smartphones. Nearly all of them. Now, what's funny is, flip the coin, and among that small percentage of 7% that say, oh no, it's actually easier than it used to be 20 years ago. They say it's easier because of technology, which is interesting. Notice tech access, more information on parenting, easier to track and reach kids. And then here's one that's interesting, only 6%, but more things to keep kids occupied. In other words, parents are just putting technology in front of their kids to keep them occupied. And so you see it interlaced in here, whether or not you see the parent or the parent sees their job as being harder or easier. But here's some just broad statistics. 40% of parents say they spend too little time with their kids. Now, I feel that pressure every single day. I don't know about you, but even with our 15-year-old, I think, boy, I'd really like to spend more time with him than I do. I feel that tension. That's a tension in me. And so I probably would fall into that category. 6 in 10 admit to spending too much time on their smartphones, and moms are probably just more honest than the dads. So the moms are saying, yeah, I probably spend too much time on my smartphone. 70% admit to being distracted by their smartphones when they're spending time with their kids. And then 80% who use social media have posted things about their children. They call that sharenting, which is interesting. And here's the deal, 80% of kids say they don't like it when their parents post things about them on social media, according to a Pew report. So, boy, that's a tension in our home. Our son gets very upset if either me or my wife post something about him. And I'm not terribly active on social media. I have Facebook, I have Instagram. I have Facebook because a previous employer told me I had to have it for communication purposes. Completely get it. I'm sure some of you are probably living in that world. I have an Instagram account with 115 followers. I've never posted anything in my life on Instagram. The only reason I have it is so I can track what my son is doing on Instagram. So I can follow his account and read the comments to his posts. So, but kids do not like it when their parents post about them. So that might be a conversation you'll want to have when you get to that point, okay? Now, let's talk about smartphone dependency. We all know this. I have mine with me. I think it's in my pocket. It's right here. How many of you have a smartphone with you? Okay. How many of you have looked at it since you've walked in the room? Yeah, me too. We all do that. Well, here's what's interesting. By 2012, half of all Americans owned a smartphone. Now, do you remember when the iPhone came out? Do you remember the year? 07. Thank you, Michael. Well, I remember that only because that's the year my son was born. So my son always says, I'm as old as the iPhone, which to him is forever. But for me, it's the blink of an eye. So think about that. In 5 years after the iPhone was introduced, half of all Americans had a smartphone of some kind. Now, they weren't all iPhones, but they were smartphones. Do you remember we used to call them crackberries. Do y'all remember the Blackberries? Anybody have a Blackberry? We called them crackberries, and I remember that it had a browser on it, and it seemed like it took forever to pull up, Martine, even ESPN. I mean, it was like, come on, I just want to score, and I would stand there for 27 minutes waiting for it to load. So I think the first iPhone I got was a 3, and it was given to me by my brother-in-law because he had already used it for like a year or two. And so I remember getting my first smartphone about 2010 or 2012, somewhere in that range. Now, here's what's funny. Half of all teenagers surveyed said today that they would rather have a broken bone than a broken phone. Half. If you could choose between a broken bone and a broken phone, which would you pick? Half of all teenagers surveyed said, I'd rather have a broken bone. My question is, what bone are we talking about? Because that would really change the answer for me. If it's a pinky, that's one thing. If it's if it's an ankle, then we're talking about something else. Well, today we compulsively, this is everyone, not just kids, reach for our smartphones more than 100 times a day. We touch our smartphone an average of 100 times a day. That's how compulsive and addictive our phones have become. And today, it's interesting, 95% of teenagers own a smartphone. 95%. That's according to a Pew report. Now, among those that are 11 and 12, that number is 91%. Now, that probably seems high to some of you because those of you with younger kids think, really? Well, Pew report says that 95% of teenagers, 13 to 17, 91% of 11 and 12-year-olds have a smartphone. And so the ubiquitous nature of technology is in everybody's hands. It's just a part of our culture, and so we're fighting against that, okay? Well, what about the impact? Most of you know this, there's less physical activity among teenagers today. There's been a 32% decrease in engagement in moderate to vigorous physical activity. There's also, and this is interesting, diminished social skills, and I'm sure all of you have witnessed this in some shape, form, or fashion. At a restaurant, as kids interact with each other, you rarely go anywhere where the kids aren't doing this while they're standing around. Well, there are some measurable results too. Eye contact is down. Kids are not learning how to have eye contact when they have conversation. 43% of communication with interpersonal communication is eye contact. Kids don't know how to do that anymore. They're struggling with that. My son just had orientation today for a new job, and I probably had to remind him half a dozen times in the interview process, eye contact. Do not take your eyes off the person who's interviewing you or ask you a question. You maintain strong eye contact. And it was a struggle for him. Really was hard for him. And we see it in a lot of teenagers' lives, and so we see the progression of digital intrusion on their lives. Of course, verbal skills are down. Teachers will tell you that kids' rhetorical skills, their vocabulary, and even grammar, just learning how to do basic grammar, those skills are diminished. Spatial awareness, how many times have you seen someone walking with their cell phone, not paying attention, and running into somebody else, or running into you maybe? And certainly we see an escalation in automobile accidents, and then of course attention span. Microsoft did a study in which they gauged the attention span of the average adult, and this study was done just a few years ago. And in the year 2002, the average adult had an attention span of somewhere in the neighborhood of 18 seconds. Today, the back end of that study, it's down to 8 seconds. Average adult has an attention span of 8 seconds, which means I've lost you about 227 times in the last few minutes because you can think faster than I can talk. We all know that, but our attention span is down. And ironically, the average attention span of a goldfish is 9 seconds, which means if you get into a staring contest with a goldfish, you're probably gonna lose. So our attention span is going down. So here's some things about social media and teenagers. Among those 13 to 17, YouTube is by far and away the most utilized social media platform, according to a Pew report. TikTok, interestingly enough, is number 2. 67% of teenagers are on it. Instagram is at 62%, Snapchat 59%. Facebook has plummeted. Since 2017, when it was at a high of 71%, it's now down to 32%. So Facebook is losing its appeal to the next generation. But Instagram and TikTok and YouTube are continuing to climb, which is interesting. And YouTube has really made a significant push for the kids' FaceTime. Facebook, of course, has dropped, and then Twitter is, who knows what's going to happen to Twitter these days. So just know that on these social media platforms, there's a gravitational pull to those things that are video-driven. You know, reels and those kinds of things. Even my son says, Dad, if I don't do a reel, nobody's going to watch it. And I said, that's okay, you'll survive. It'll be okay. So as we start thinking about social media, video has become the primary platform for that. Instagram alone, $1 billion in annual revenue. 40% of Instagram users are under 22. 22 million teenagers log on to Instagram every single day. And that's compared with only 5 million on the Facebook, and they spend 50% more time on Instagram, scrolling and scrolling and scrolling. And you've probably seen your kids or grandkids doing that. Sad news is 1 out of every 3 teenage girls feel worse about their bodies after being on Instagram. 1 out of 3. And 6% of teens trace their suicidal thoughts directly to Instagram, what they viewed on Instagram. So the comparison trap, of course, emerges and really has a negative impact. And so there's just some things that are going on that we need to pay attention to. Now, how many of you heard about the study that Facebook did on itself? Well, it was a fascinating report. I don't know if any of you read it. You can, it's called a deep dive. I think that's what it's called, a deep dive. And it's about a 75-page document. And the Wall Street Journal pre-published some of the findings in September of 21, so just a little over a year ago, on what Facebook discovered about itself and the impact that it was having through its platforms, including Instagram, on teenagers. And this was a summary statement that was published in the Wall Street Journal. Our platforms, proven to be harmful to millions of young users. Teens blame Instagram for increases in rates of anxiety and depression, and the link between suicidal thoughts and our platforms is in fact real. That's Facebook talking, knowing that their product is having a harmful effect on our kids. Cal Newport, who, by the way, great resource here. The last book I read on just technology encroaching in our world is, I don't know if you're familiar with Cal Newport. I read this last summer. In fact, when we were on our mission trip to Idaho, I had a little downtime. I read this. It says, choosing a focused life in a noisy world. And Newport says in here that Philip Morris, the tobacco company, wanted our lungs, but the App Store wants our souls. And there's a reason for that. The interesting thing is he advocates for a reduction in use of technology on a personal level, and this guy actually teaches computer science at Georgetown University. And so he's also published another book now that just came out recently on curtailing the use of email and how we can get our life back through using less email. Email feels like such a dinosaur platform these days, doesn't it? But anyway, that's a good book, and I certainly wanted you to know about that one. So what did the report that Facebook published tell us? Well, it's interesting. It's really kind of hard to see. But at the bottom, the question that they asked teenagers is, how has Instagram affected the way you feel about yourself and your mental health? That was a question that Facebook asked to teenagers. Is it affecting you and your mental health? And the overwhelming result is, well, yes. And here's what's interesting. There is a large consensus among teenagers in this study about the issues of mental health. In other words, teenagers now, even younger ones, are identifying the markers of mental health. And if you can see this at the top, number one is, well, if you want to kill yourself, then you've got a mental health issue. That was pretty unanimous. You want to hurt yourself, you're down, you're sad, you're depressed, you're not good enough, alone or lonely, you have to be happy, and you can see the rest of those there. The bottom line is social media platforms are contributing to all of that, and that's what Facebook discovered. But there was an amazing consensus among teenagers about what the real problems were. And so we're seeing this on an epic scale. So the primary takeaways that Facebook published, teens generally agree on the definition of mental health. We just saw that. 82% of teens have felt at least one emotional issue in the past month. 1 in 5 has thought about suicide or self-injury. Instagram has a positive impact on their mental health, but among those who are unsatisfied with their lives, they're more negatively affected by the app. So you get the general picture of what they're saying. The bottom line is they did try to put a positive spin on it and say, well, you know, there's some good things coming through Instagram, but the overwhelming majority of data shows that it's having a horribly negative impact on our kids. So as far as the platforms are concerned, these aren't exclusive outcomes, but the findings are that the downside of Instagram is social comparison. And that is really tough on kids. I don't know if you remember middle school, junior high. We called it junior high when I was there, so that's how old I am. We didn't have middle school, we had junior high. Boy, it was hard, and I would never want to do that again. But there's a heavy focus on body and lifestyle. And if you're on Instagram or you've seen it, you see that that's what's featured in so many of the Instagram posts. Number two, I got my slide went backwards. Let's see if I can fix it. Snapchat keeps the focus on the face, but it's softened by humor. And in TikTok, which has really had an emergence recently, focuses on performance. But the downside of it is you can get lost. I don't know if any of you are active on TikTok. I just kind of peered into it just to see what it was like. And there's an obscene number of videos and things in there that just, it'll overwhelm you. You'll get sucked into it pretty quickly. I didn't set up an account. I just wanted to see what it was like because I've never posted anything on TikTok. My son asked me if he could open a TikTok account, and we said one media platform, so we kept him in Instagram, and that's where he's done most of his work. All right, let's talk about parents. Now, as you've navigated these waters with your kids and grandkids, what have been your approaches in either talking to or trying to manage social media and technology in their lives? What have you done? Besides threaten them.
Watched the movie Social Dilemma.
Yeah, it's great.
And begrudgingly at first, but by the middle of it, he was completely enthralled. And after the end, we had a great conversation.
Good.
And he was shocked by the statistics of suicide and depression and all the things that you just went over in that movie. And then seeing the people that are responsible for bringing those platforms to life and what their intent was versus what happened. And now they're trying to stop it. That was very impactful.
Great.
So we thought that that was something that we saw as a positive.
Fabulous. And I love the commitment as a family to sit down and watch something like that, which I get the pushback. I've seen it in my own home. Do you think that the impact has been sustainable in your household
Yes.
to date?
Aiden is not allowed to have a smartphone. He has a dumb phone. It's called
Okay.
a dab phone.
There you go.
It doesn't have internet access or.
Great.
So for us, I would say it's been easy because he knows the rules, but it's not easy because everyone else, he's the only one that's not participating in all of this.
Gotcha.
In middle school. And so
Oh, yeah.
to navigate, it's just a lot of conversation.
Yeah.
Right.
No, he's not the only. All right. Any other Okay, thank you, Brandy. Any other conversations you've had that have been productive, fruitful in your home?
There's some really good Christian resources that we found, but one, I like the account Wait Until 8, and it's talking about delaying a smartphone at least until 8, if not longer.
Gotcha.
And so there's some really great videos to that. And,
Great.
And we have some good family, friends in our lives that have older boys and have navigated and delayed a smartphone
Okay.
and social media, and I think Thompson even this year has seen how social media, even in great Christian schools, there can be
Can work together.
And so really, we focused on their brains aren't developed.
Right.
It's really not a good idea to give someone an
Right.
instant
Yes.
ability to post their thought
Right.
and share it with everybody immediately. And so we've really just tried to focus on, it's not trying to keep you from something, but just like giving you more time to develop, and that anything you
Great.
post is forever.
That's right.
So
We'll
that's-
touch that in a minute. Yeah,
so
that's great.
That's been kind of
And tell me, just so everybody else can hear it, tell us that resource one more time.
Wait Until 8.
Wait until 8?
It's focusing on 8th grade, delaying, and they follow a lot of great accounts as well that help you really understand exactly like what social media, like I know you post a lot of that. Right now, Be Real is one of their top apps right now. And,
Great.
And that's even, just it's constantly changing.
Great.
So we try to stay up on it, as
Okay.
much as we can.
Fabulous. And we'll hit some of these resources at the end just as a quick reference guide. So anybody else want to share that anything you've used that's been helpful, any guidelines, and we'll have a little bit more conversation. Martine? Isn't that hard though? Right. Great. Yeah. Good. Great. That- Yes. Yes. Well, these are great ideas. We're going to cultivate some more of them from you when we get a little deeper into this. But thank you for sharing. I appreciate that. That helps me. Well, you know this is intuitive. Parental responses range generally from total isolation from social media and technology on one extreme. And then you have another one where there's saturation. Just use it however you want to. We don't care. There are no boundaries. There are no guardrails. There are no guidelines. Just use it if you want. No big deal. And then the one that we're sort of advocating for tonight is one of what I like to call interpretation, where we interpret it. Because here's what we all know. It's going to be hard to live, to encourage our kids to live in a world and completely isolate them from technology, social media. That's going to be hard. I don't think that's realistic. Eastside Christian School has an Instagram account, and I follow it. And that's a good thing, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But to really take the approach of interpreting technology, digital media, and its impact and appropriate usage in our kids' lives and being able to model it, as Martine said. And we'll tap that in just a minute. So a couple things that we're drilling down on when it comes to helping our kids navigate this technology in their lives and in their worlds are the issues of social and emotional skills. You've probably heard of this, SEL. And there are two that emerge in this dialogue that I think are important. They also have biblical roots. And so I want to touch those really quickly. The first is impulse control. I was here at the school today in the third grade boys' classroom for about 45 minutes. And, I don't take medication, but I felt like I needed to when I was done with those third grade boys. And told the teachers, I said, God bless you, you're saints. And I think I, blessed them or something. But we had a great conversation with those third grade boys. They're full of energy. And it's always fun to be with them, and I enjoy that. I've done that on more than one occasion. But I was reminded of, hey, impulse control is a social and emotional skill we really have to work on with our kids. And we start that pretty young, don't we? And so it continues. It's the ability to control sudden strong urges and desires to act on something. And Galatians 5:22 and 23, as you probably know, is Paul's list of the fruit of the Spirit. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and the last one is self-control. So this idea of impulse control is very biblical. And so we want to infuse that into everything that we do. I mean, I had to exercise impulse control today when someone cut me off turning from Holt Road onto Lower Roswell Road. And I told my son about it when I got him from school this afternoon. I said, Dad had to have a moment of impulse control. And we talked about that as he is learning to drive. So that's one, and certainly it's a factor in usage of social media and technology. The second one is critical thinking. Examining your circumstances, identifying both the risks and the benefits, and that certainly fits into the mold of our discussion on social media, and then gathering the information you need to make a good, healthy decision. Both of these feed one another. Now, Proverbs 14:8 is one of my favorite verses in Proverbs. I don't know if you've ever done this, but my son and I, we read a proverb a day, every day when he was in middle school, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. So on the first of the month, we'd read Proverbs 1. Second day of the month, we'd read Proverbs 2. Great practical counsel and wisdom, everything from anger to sexual relationship. I mean, it's all there in Proverbs. It's so good. Well, this is one of those verses that can get lost in all the data, if you will, in Proverbs. The wisdom of the prudent is to give thought to their ways, but the folly of fools is deception. And this is part of the social, emotional, and I would say spiritual control we need to really help our kids with. Most of you know that the word prudent means that apt or that ability or that willingness to give care and thought for the future. In other words, if I am prudent, I am thinking right now about the future and the impact that this present moment is going to have on the future. And that has lots of implications, as you all know. So if you wanted to translate this for your kids, here's the best way I know how to translate it. Your present will become your past, and it's going to show up in the future. And when it does, is it going to be a happy meeting or is it going to be a sad meeting? And that's really one of those biblical principles that you can instill into this conversation about social media. Because, as we'll see in a minute, anything you put on social media is out there for the world to see. And if you rant and rave or you post something really ridiculous and unwise, that's going to come back to bite you. And we've all probably done that once or twice in our lives. I probably shouldn't have said that. I probably shouldn't have written that. I probably shouldn't have done that. But this is a great verse to come back to. And depending on how you interpret it to your kids, to say, look, are you really thinking with some level of prudence? And let's talk about your present because it'll show up in your future in some way, okay? So let's start talking about a digital declutter, and we'll move quickly here. Most of you know this famous quote from Thoreau, who wrote, "The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation." Maybe if we interpreted it for you, the mass of parents lead lives of quiet desperation. You really don't know what to do with your kids when it comes to technology, social media, and screen time. But what is not often quoted is I would say the more positive rejoinder that Thoreau adds to that. He says, they honestly think there's no choice left, hence the desperation. But alert and healthy natures remember that the sun rose clear. It's never too late to give up our prejudices, or in this case, to give up our fight. So let's lean in there with our kids and fight a little bit, and hopefully we can make some progress. So let's talk about behavioral addiction. 2 factors that lead to behavioral addiction, you know these: intermittent positive reinforcement. If you want to initiate addictive behavior, then what you look for is intermittent positive reinforcement. It's true of drug use, true of alcohol, anything that you get addicted to. The word addiction is a Latin word which means to submit to the gods. So you're putting yourself at the mercy of the gods, as they used to say in Rome. But addiction is fostered by intermittent positive reinforcement. Most of you know that. Is that because of the dopamine that gets released? And the intermittent part means that it goes high and it goes low, it goes high and it goes low, which is why we get hits of meth, alcohol, whatever our chosen drug of choice is. And so addiction comes through intermittent positive reinforcement. And the second thing is the drive for social approval. You put those two together, and you're gonna have addiction on an epic scale. And that's really where the fight is with our kids and social media. And so we have to be aware of that. So you've got the like button on Facebook, you've got the heart button on Instagram. You get intermittent positive reinforcement when you post something, and because of the likes, because of the hearts, you get social approval, and you get what they call the attention economy. And Cal Newport said compulsion is a massively profitable business. And that's where we are in the social media world. So we have now what they call, this is an actual developing economy, is the attention economy. And what it means is that business sector that makes money gathering consumers' attention and then repackaging it and selling it to advertisers. So how many of you have gotten on your Instagram, Facebook, whatever account you use, just to check something, just to look, and 30 minutes later, you're still, Well, the longer you're on any social media platform, the more money is made by the platform provider. That is what they call the attention economy. And because of that, they now have a field called attention engineering. So there are people that actually make a living trying to figure out how to keep you inside those social media platforms, and of course our kids as well. So this field of attention engineering is the science of figuring out how to exploit psychological vulnerabilities. Now, those psychological vulnerabilities go back to social and emotional issues. For instance, being able to have occasional positive reinforcement, social approval. Those are our vulnerable spots. And that's true for your kids and my kids. So we exploit those to trick users into spending far more time on various social media platforms than they actually intended. Compulsive use is not an accident. It's a fundamental play in the digital attention economy playbook. They are intentionally trying to drag us into those platforms because they make more money and more money and more money. The longer you stay, the more they get paid. That's the way it works. And that's the world we're living in now. So let's talk about a digital detox, okay? Martine, you touched on this one. Start with self. Here's what we have to do, I think, as parents. Let your kids see you pulling away from technology, okay? It doesn't mean you have to have a parade and a party, but it does mean that they need to see you putting your smartphone down, intentionally turning off your laptop, closing your laptop, anything to send a signal to them that that's not important, even if it's addictive to you. And it can be, believe me, I've caught many times being on my phone or my laptop way too much, okay? One thing I would encourage you to do is don't click like or the heart button, okay? See these easy clicks as poison. What do we call them, clickbait? Well, you see them in several platforms, but every time you click like, okay, you're gonna get feeds that are gonna suit that particular stream, as they call, and the attention engineers are paying attention. They're watching what you do. So if you click like, just know that more is coming, so be very, very careful. Now, I realize, for instance, if my son posts something, he tells us what he's gonna post, and we've got some guidelines, and I'll tell you a little bit about that, is I wanna see it first, and I'll usually click like. I'll do that with my son. And then occasionally, if there's someone I know, or for instance, Eastside Christian School, we had a magician in yesterday and we posted some pictures. Nothing wrong with that. I hearted that on Instagram. So that was me, by the way. I was one of, I don't know how many people did that. Yeah, it was a lot. Okay, but be very careful. And if you don't know the person or you don't know the organization, avoid it and teach your kids to avoid it. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. Another idea, keep your phone in do not disturb mode always. That's kind of hard to do. Silence your notifications. Limit streaming media viewing in your home. That's one way your kids can begin to see that. Look, we've got Netflix, and I know The Crown just dropped, and I know you're addicted to The Crown, or at least we are in our household. I've only made it through, I think the 5th episode. But you know, I've talked to some people as far as their streaming platforms, Hulu and Amazon Prime and Disney Plus. The ones that are really wise with their use of that, never watch it alone. They'll never binge alone. They'll always watch it with someone. If they're married, of course, their spouse. I think that's great accountability anyway. And if you're not married or there's not a spouse in the home, be very careful. Limit it to a certain number of minutes or maybe an hour a day. And just let your kids know, look, we're not gonna be controlled by this. I don't care how many new episodes of whatever drop on the various platforms. And then one of the things that we've tried to do is prioritize demanding activity over passive consumption. What I mean by that is, hey, let's go ride bikes. Let's go for a hike. Let's do something that's a little more physically strenuous that requires engagement or conversation. Because really for kids, conversation is demanding activity these days. I mean, it's become that in our culture. And then schedule in advance your low quality leisure time. If you just really want to be on Instagram for a few minutes, schedule it. Saturday mornings at 8:30 till 9, I'm gonna be on Instagram. And let your kids know. These are just some ideas to begin to cultivate some of those things that could help you. Now, one of the things that we want to talk about tonight quickly, and we're going to start pushing through this and finish up in a few minutes. Anything posted, this is what you got to tell your kids. Anything posted on social media platforms is publicly consumable. It's going to be out there, and there's nothing you can do about it. So be very careful as you talk to them to remind them that, hey, you can't take it back. Once you click post, you can't take it back. And boy, how many people have been victimized by that mistake? Number two, once it's posted, it's out of your control. Can't do anything about it. This is where impulse control becomes an issue. Beware of that. Of course, a ground rule, avoid drama or hurting others. Be careful with your speech. Never post your location. That's what we tell our son, don't post your location. He put in there in his account, his profile, that he lives in the US. I said, that's as close as we're gonna get, okay? And that's fine. And then of course, watch the clock. Now, what I wanna do is hand out a sample social media contract. And it's on the screen. You can take this home. Yeah, can you just pass some of those back? That'd be great, thank you. And this is copyrighted by Family First, but it's a great, and I wasn't gonna reinvent this because I think it's really good. So as you talk to your son, your daughter, your grandson, your granddaughter, one of the things that you can do is literally sit down and walk through a social media contract. And most of this you're probably already thinking about or doing, but formally doing this with your son or daughter is huge. And then put it on your refrigerator. Now, when my wife and I got married, the pastor that did our wedding, we did premarital counseling with him, and he made us write, you ready for this? A contract for fighting fair. So we literally had to sit down one night as part of our homework and go, all right, when we fight, what are the ground rules? Because the assumption was every now and then you're gonna have an argument with your spouse. It's gonna happen. Okay, well, what's off limits? And what are the healthy ways that you can disagree? And so we wrote it, I signed it, my wife signed it, the pastor signed it, and it doesn't now because we've moved, but it hung in our bathroom. And so anytime we'd get amped up in our household, we'd walk over and go, hey, you just violated number 7. Oh yeah, well, you just violated number 4. Well, then we need to sit down and talk this through. Contract for fighting fair. Well, this in several ways is a physical reminder of the agreement that you have with your son or daughter with the use of social media. And you can tailor this if you want to for technology of any kind. But I'll ask my parents' permission when it comes to setting up. No rogue or shadow social media accounts out there. We found out not too long ago our son had a second email address. And we were not happy. So we said, all right, I want the password for this, and we're gonna go in and we're gonna read every email that's been, fortunately, there was nothing bad. But the fact that he did it had us over the moon upset. And so, you know, our kid, Jackson, our son's a pretty compliant kid. You know, we were like, what is going on, you know? I will allow my parents to set my privacy and parental controls, give my parents my passwords, and then sharing. You can just walk through this with your son or your daughter, checking the boxes as you go, and then down at the bottom, you agree and your child agrees. And then put this up somewhere. Put it on your refrigerator. And this is a go-to whenever you have any issues with their social media use. Now, has anyone tried this in your home? Anything like this? Hey, if you're really feeling froggy, you can do this for cleaning your room, washing clothes, anything you want. But for social media, I think this would be good. And again, you can tailor it for technology in general. So those of you that gave me your email address, when I send you this, I'll also send you a copy of that. So you can make multiple copies if you have kids or tailor it as you want, okay? Now, let's talk for a minute about some ideas, and then we're gonna wrap up because I can tell that there are a lot of goldfish in the room, and I'm feeling you right now, okay? All right, just some ideas to get you thinking. Since social media is addictive, equip kids to self-regulate their time using social media. That's one of the goals. Because remember, you're not gonna remove it from their lives in all likelihood. So teach them to self-regulate. And some of you are already doing these things, so this is not rocket science. I would say practice a 2-hour or less time limit. Screen time, but certainly social media. And here's why. For some reason, nearly all the data shows that there is a magical threshold at 2 hours Once a kid gets over 2 hours of use in any given day, the chances that they're going to be depressed, anxious, or suicidal skyrocket. So if you keep it below 2 hours, the data is showing us now that you stand far less of a chance seeing your kids get anxious, depressed, or suicidal. There's just something magical about that 2 hour limit. Now, some of you are thinking, well, that's way too much. I'm with you on that. But once you get to 2 hours, you're probably gonna have greater chance of having an issue. Of course, many of you are already doing this, no phones or screen time before or after certain hours, and that can be as early as you want. 6 o'clock before dinner. You're not gonna look at your phone until you go off to school, if you even take it to school. Now, we have a teenager who's a 10th grader, he takes his to school, but he's not supposed to have it out at school. I mean, that's not cool. And then, of course, install or set up parental controls. How many of you have kids using any kind of digital media platform for which you have some form of control or restraint built in? Okay. Michael, what are you using? What are y'all using?
The parental controls on the Apple.
Okay. And that's what we use. Yeah. Okay. Same thing? Yeah, we have that, and our son gets a little frustrated sometimes. What's the passcode? I'm not telling you. That's the whole point, So parental controls of any kind are good. And so that's important. All right, another idea, since social media is harmful, as we know, equip kids to engage redemptively. I would say if you wanted to explore some great things that are happening on social media platforms, celebrate those. I keep coming back to Eastside School's Instagram account. There's usually some things there that will inform you, which you can celebrate and teach your kids to go, wow, look at that, Look at the basketball team, look at the magician, look at the Veterans Day. There's all kinds of things. And there are a lot of other organizations that are healthy doing kingdom building things, which you can find and even share with your kids and say, hey, let's celebrate this. Isn't this cool? And there are lots of things like that. The executive director for Must Ministries was with us a couple of weeks ago. And they do a lot of great work in our community, Storehouse Ministries, those kinds of things. And so if you can find those things, churches, nonprofits, the school, other things like that, teach your kids to celebrate the goodness of what is happening and being shared on social media and not just the comparison trap. And that's good. And since social media fosters shaming and depression, equip kids to stop comparing themselves. School counselors say the top emotions experienced by teenagers today are anxiety, inferiority, and shame. That's where your little ones are headed. And school counselors are going to see that more and more, and it's become more and more of an issue. So, and you know this, we often compare our worst features with somebody else's best features. And so we have to teach our kids not to go there. Yeah, they're a great basketball player, or they're a great athlete, or they're really smart, but you're really good at this too. Let's celebrate that. So to combat the comparison there. Social media fosters questionable ethics with little accountability. Consider separating from social media. Some of you have done this. Fasting is one option. You should know this. It takes about 40 days to break a habit. Roughly 40 days to break a habit. Tons of you, and maybe you've done this, taken social media off your phone. Any of you done that? A few of you? Anybody? Okay. I've done that, taken it off for a period of time. I hardly interact on Facebook. I just don't. Instagram, I'm on pretty regularly because of my son, but that's about it. I don't post anything, but I do get feeds from places like the school, the church, and so I'll interact with those. But sometimes fasting is good. Limit social media interaction to one or no platforms. Just pick one. Tell your kids, if you're going to do one, you do one. That's it. No more. Just pick one. And if they start whining about wanting a second one, then say, well, are you going to give up the other one? And then you'll find how hard it is to come off of that and delete your account. That's a whole nother session right there. All right, let's talk about the best parental control apps. According to Parent Magazine, these are the best parental control apps for your kids. And again, we'll get this to you. Anybody using any of these? Okay, which one? I'm sorry? Screen time, and that work? How does that work for you? Is it great? Okay. Great. Gotcha. Has to request. Make him put it in writing, you know? That's great. Okay, thank you for that because that helps me. I haven't used that one yet, but I've heard it's really good. Okay? Any others? Anybody using any of these? Okay. I do know that there are a few that really Bark. Anybody heard of Bark? Bark is a good one. Have you used that one? Okay, and generally pleased with it?
Yeah, our previous Christian school used it as an entire school.
Great.
On their computers, so it's like searching through things you type, et cetera. It's based in like
Fabulous.
It's a great program.
Okay.
I highly recommend it.
Great.
As soon as we go to a cell phone, we'll be getting it because it searches your cell phone.
Great. Well, I'm a little surprised it didn't show up on Parent Magazine's study, but I know that all of these are, based on what I'm hearing and what I know about them, is really good. Ever Accountable is one that really sort of monitors the sexual exploitation, pornography, as well as Covenant Eyes. Last staff I served on, several of us guys that were on that staff were all in on Covenant Eyes together, and so we just shared that among ourselves, and that was our accountability group. But there are a lot of other platforms that you can use. Ever Accountable is a good one.
Do any of these, like the Ever Accountable, do they screen for photos somehow? It's easy to screen for text,
Right.
but can they screen photos?
Yeah, I don't, does screen time do that? It doesn't.
There is a feature you can turn on your phone that will, but you have to give them rights to be able to send your pictures.
Right. That's the problem. You have to share.
I was a specialist in a public school in Cobb County for years, and they had to go to search engines specifically for kids because there was no way to screen photos.
Right.
I mean, I retired 5 years ago, so maybe there is now. But we were very limited in at one point they were just letting them use Bing, which is lousy.
Right.
But there was Yahoo for Kids, they couldn't use Google. I mean, it was because of this issue.
Well, I think that when you've got institutional controls and certain URLs are excluded or flagged, I think you can tap those a little easier than you can individual accounts. But look, just being on Instagram myself, I'll pull mine up and I'll go, oh my goodness. I can't believe some of the things that just get dumped into my feed. And I'm like, of course they know everything about me in all likelihood. That's the way it works. And so, I'll show it to them. I said, look, and I said, I have no idea how that got there. And I mean, it's the Instagram influencers and the body conscious messages that you constantly see in Instagram. Fortunately, I don't see that very often, but it even appears in mine. And I'm not searching for it. All I'm doing is going to my son's. And then there's a few things that I follow, like Eastside Christian, Eastside Church, a few other churches, and a few other friends of mine that are, either in ministry or I've just known them for years. I mean, it's just like what you do. So I would say explore these. Most of these have free platforms or free features. And then if you want upgraded features that go a little more in depth, you can certainly pay for that for a subscription. But most of them run from $7 to $10 a month for the really high-end parental control apps. And you can always do a search and then ask around. And if in this dialogue you bump into one that you've used, like Screen Time, some of the others, I would say let us know and say, hey, we've had great success with this. I get a lot of good feedback on Ever Accountable and Bark. Those are two. Covenant Eyes is really been promoted among young men and even older men, of course, too, because of the pornography issues, and it'll catch that in those. But there are a lot of apps that do that as well. Okay. Have you Circle?
Yeah, but I think it only will protect your at-home network. So if they go.
Right, they're out. Yeah.
I don't know if or maybe it does come out, but
Gotcha.
I've heard of it, of friends using it.
Right. Well, I will tell you, the ones that generate reports are really good, but reviewing the reports can be a full-time job, as much as kids are using their phones and on their laptops and on their computers. So, and again, we'll get these to you, and then that way you can explore those on your own. So let's talk about some best practices. Some of you have already shared some of the guidelines, and we've talked about social media contract. I'll push through this kind of quickly because we're really kind of out of time. Tools, apps, parental controls have worked best for you. We talked about screen time. Is there anything that you're using that we missed that we haven't talked about? Okay. I'm just curious to know, do any of you really feel like you're losing this battle in your home with your kids? Or maybe you don't know that you're losing the battle with your kids.
The people who care about this are here tonight.
Exactly.
You ask that to
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. You feel it.
I don't feel like we're losing the battle. I think that you become an anomaly, whatever I'm trying to say. There's less of us in the room that
Right.
have delay. And the one reason I like Wait Until 8, they've swapped their thing to delaying social media to 16. So it's not that you're saying no social media, but just let,
Right.
especially these brains develop what you're saying about girls looking at things. And I mean, I have boys struggle just, you're not, there's a lot of things boys can struggle with, about body image, not just girls.
Yes.
So I think delaying, when you have people, and we talk a lot about you're responsible for your own kids, so put your blinders on, but I think that's probably the hard thing is like, even getting it from parents, like, well, they kind of want you to get your kid on social media because their kid's on social media.
Exactly.
And so that becomes hard and it's feeling like, hey, we're not judging what you're doing, but I'm going to focus on what's
Yeah.
best for our kids and just getting them outside. And honestly, our pediatrician saw really bad, like COVID years, and really has supported us big time.
Oh,
And
that's
said,
good.
"Please delay.
That's
Please
good.
Delay social media as long as you can." Like the amount of kids that are in here that are struggling, and so to come from a doctor has been
Mm-hmm.
really impactful. So I think that would be not that we're losing the battle, but I think
Sure.
you're here tonight, you definitely care about it, and it feels a little more like you're on an island. And one thing that I'll say to Eastside that I'm so thrilled with is their phone lockers. I think
Yes.
I've walked around and seen kids talking about eye contact. Last year, I remember walking in and just seeing kids like, nobody's being bad, just like bent down,
Right.
like doing this. And this year to just walk around and see kids talking is such a gift. And
It's
such a way
great.
to like support these kids and make them have one leg, like ability just to do these things that a lot of other schools don't. So hats off to Dr. Slar and Ms.
Yeah.
Gay for really seeing that and uniting the school like that. I think that's really powerful.
That's
and
great.
exciting. So
Well, thank you.
that would be my take on the losing the battle.
Great. Well, thank you for sharing that because I share that sentiment. And, the last question is, please let us know how we can partner with you as a school in this battle, if you will, with your kids. It's not ubiquitous during school, better not be. But at the same time, we realize that battle then commences when your kid gets home, and where technology enters. We really do believe it's a spiritual battle, and just changing how the brain functions and creating new habits, trying to kill old ones. That's not easy, and we have such a compulsive culture today that it's really hard to fight against that within the context of your household as it creeps in. And I certainly see it with my son. Well, we want to keep this dialogue going. So as we finish tonight, just know that we're not trying to say, okay, we're done. We'll pick up some of these themes, and we definitely want you to know that we're in this battle with you. So you can email me. Again, you'll have this. I do want you to know, I mentioned this to a couple of folks before we got started. Our second Parent University for this year is March the 2nd. I think I got that date right. And as if this was controversial, we're going to touch this one. We're going to talk about gender, identity, and sexuality. And that will be the conversation we'll have. And do want you to know that 2 or 3 weeks ago in chapel, we did just lightly touch this topic by talking about the binary reality in creation, not just men and women and animals, male and female, but creation outside of that there's a binary structure in creation. And we talked about that in relation to boys being boys and girls being girls, and that's exactly how God created you. And we certainly believe that God created every person, male or female, immutably so. and that is a foundational pillar of the biblical worldview. So we're going to come back and talk about this as parents and how we can combat some of the language and the cultural shift that's going on by discussing identity, gender, and sexuality. So we'll be developing this over the next few months, few weeks, and then we'll have this discussion on March the 2nd. I would imagine once we get it out there, there'll be some interest. So we're looking forward to offering that for you, okay? Well, hey, thank you for being here tonight. I hope this was helpful, and know that we love having this kind of dialogue, and I love leaning into Dr. Stark to say, hey, what are you hearing as you lead the school from the parents? What are you seeing among the kids? Even our time today with the third graders, I huddled with the teachers before I met with that group and said, all right, what do we need to talk about today? And certainly they've got their eyes and ears on your kids and want the best for them. And so I love the work that they're doing, and I'm just kind of standing on their shoulders, really, and Dr. Stark's as well. So, hey, if you haven't done so already, make sure you get your name and email address on those pieces of paper. Just leave them where they are. I'll pick them up as we leave, and I'm going to pray us out. If you've got any questions, you can see me after, or you probably need to get home and make sure your kids are not on social media. So you can email me there, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time. So let me pray us out. Father, thank you for the ministry of Eastside Christian School. I'm grateful for Dr. Stark and her leadership. But Lord, I'm really grateful for these parents who have made it their commitment to seek what's best in their kids' lives and in their grandkids' lives. And Father, I'm grateful that you've not left us without tools, without wisdom, without understanding. But Father, we feel like at times we're fighting an uphill battle. So I pray that you would give each parent a measure of patience and understanding, and in their own way, self-control. But Father, may we diligently teach your word to our children, to invest in the next generation, and specifically those to whom you've entrusted us. And so, Lord, thank you for our kids, our boys, our girls, all that you're doing in their hearts and minds. May they be formed in the image of Christ, and may you empower and equip us to help you in that process. And we'll give you glory for that. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, guys, thank you for being here.